Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good afternoon. Alhamdulillah, we meet again on the air in the program Man and Nature, produced by Batisha Afrida. Welcome to the program. For the next half an hour, you are on air with me, Sheikh Muhammad Saifuddeen with Sheikh Muhammad Salleh, and joining me is a special guest who will be sharing her expertise and views on the topic that we have chosen for today. But before we proceed, since we are still in the first few days of Shawwal, I believe it is not too late for me to wish all our valued listeners Selamat Hari Raya Aidilfitri, Eid Mubarak, Kullu Am wa Antum bi Khair, and Maaf Zahir dan Batin. Ladies and gentlemen, as was mentioned in our first episode of Man and Nature last week, the overarching theme for this season is biodiversity. In keeping with the chosen theme, our topic for discussion this week is biodiversity and the importance of law. And to deliberate on this topic, we are very fortunate to have with us in the studio Associate Professor Dr. Siti Hafsyah binti Idris, who is the Deputy Dean of Research and Industrial Linkages from the Faculty of Law, Universiti Teknologi MARA or UITM. Assalamualaikum and welcome to the program, Doctor.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Doctor, for the invitations.
My pleasure, and also I think it's proper for me to start with Selamat Hari Raya Aidilfitri, Maaf Zahir dan Batin.
Selamat Hari Raya to Doctor and also all the audience.
Thank you for being able to spend some time into this Man and Nature.
My pleasure.
Okay, Dr. Siti Hafsyah, our topic, as I said, is biodiversity and the importance of law. And perhaps to begin our discussion, could you enlighten us on what is meant biodiversity, what is meant by biodiversity, and why is it important?
Okay. Thank you, Doctor, for the question. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. When we talk about biodiversity, what is biodiversity? Biodiversity is a community of living organisms where they interact. Before let me rephrase the sentence. For us to understand biodiversity, we need to understand first what is ecosystem. Okay, because ecosystem is a community of living organisms where all these organisms they are interact with each other in a non-living environment. So these living things is part of the biodiversity. So we need to understand that biodiversity refer to the variety of life. Okay, on the earth, including the diversity of species, ecosystem, and genetic. Because we have to remember, when we talk about biodiversity, it consists of three components. One is the species biodiversity, second one is the genetic biodiversity, and the third one is ecosystem biodiversity. So all this is very important in the ecosystem change. And why is it so important for the biodiversity? Because we don't want to break the chains of ecosystems. Because when the chains break, and it can actually unbalance the ecosystem itself. So that is why it's very important for us, before we talk about the law, we need to understand first what is biodiversity, how it relates to ecosystems, and why is it important for us to actually to preserve, to conserve, and to protect the biodiversity.
Okay. Having defined biodiversity, from your point of view, what are the main threats to biodiversity?
The main threat for biodiversity is the loss of biodiversity. But we have to understand the causes. There are two causes, mainly two causes. One is the loss to biodiversity due to natural loss. It can be seasons, it can be natural ecological disturbance, for example, natural disasters. But this one, we can consider it as a sustainable loss because it's happening in a cycle. It's a nature, like migrations of the wildlife from one place to another place because of the seasonal change, but it will come back to the original place. That one is the loss to biodiversity through natural loss, seasonals, and natural ecological disturbance like earthquakes. But after that, there will be the impact might be giving some benefit to the loss. So this one we can say is a positive loss. But another major threat to biodiversity is the human activities, human populations, constructions of the city, farming, and also pollution as a result of these three, of the result of the human populations, and as a result of the constructions, city, and also farming. Because farming is actually consume a lot of lands, consume a lot of biodiversity, especially on the construction of cities. Yes, we need a sustainable cities. We need smart cities, and also the increased numbers of human population. Also, we need to take into consideration. It can actually cause to the loss of biodiversity.
Okay. Now, as a person who is from the law background, and you mentioned earlier about the law, why are laws necessary when it comes to protecting the rich biodiversity that we have?
Okay, why law is very important? Because law, first, when we talk about biodiversity, what the first thing we need to do to make sure that biodiversity is still there. So we cannot only manage, we cannot only maintain, but we need to make sure that this biodiversity is sustainably used, sustainably protected. So how do we want to protect that? How we want to conserve the biodiversity? We need to know the why. Why we need to conserve, why we need to protect, because go back to the definition just now, is the importance of the ecosystem, the importance of our life, our own life. So sometimes when we talk about law, we think that, oh, we cannot do this or cannot do that. Law is always black and white. No. It's actually, the role of the law is actually to regulate, to ensure that biodiversity is actually being protected, and also be preserved in such a manner that we can sustainably use the biodiversity in the long run. So when you go back to your question, Doctor, just now, why is it important? Yes, because we want to regulate. Why we want to regulate? Because we want to make sure that the biodiversity is protected in a well manner, and everyone has their role, and they know what to do when they have the law. If we don't have the law, then everyone can take the way on they want to protect or they want to destroy on their hands. And sometimes when they don't have the policy or the law to guide them, when we talk about biodiversity again, Doctor, and environment, is a collective things. It's a consensus to reach the compromise. Just now I mentioned to you. So it's not a one man show. We cannot work in silo. So we have to, like I always give an example to my student. For example, if we segregate the waste in our house, we separate our waste in the house. We have 3 bins, for example. So we have for the food waste, we have the plastic waste, and also we have the general waste. And after that, we tied the plastic or whatever for the waste, and then we do it diligently from our part. But when we put it outside our house, the waste collector, they do not have that system, the management system of the waste. They just dump it, throw it into their lorry or transportations, and it's not being separated at all. So it's a one way, and then we don't have any what we call it as a collective cooperation from others. So we will feel that our effort is useless and we are not contributing to restorations of the environment and also biodiversity. So that is why we need law, so that everyone knows their responsibility and everyone knows their role to actually to protect the biodiversity, so that we can work this and then make that law to be implemented in a comprehensive way.
Interesting that you raise the example of separating waste. I think this is a systemic problem.
Yeah.
We have done our part, but when it goes into the system, it's not being continued. I remember a lecturer friend from one university told me that they have separate bins for separate types of waste. But when the cleaner comes to collect the waste, she just put everything in one container. So at the end of the day, the effort is in itself is a waste.
Yeah.
Waste of effort and waste of time.
Waste of time, yes.
Yeah, so this can be quite a challenge if you want to talk about bringing about protection to the environment and also the biodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
Now you mentioned about laws. I'm sure there are so many laws that have been enacted in Malaysia with regards to biodiversity. Perhaps our listeners would like to know what are some of the examples of laws that we have in our country.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor, for the questions. When we want to talk about the law, we have actually significant of numbers of laws that govern biodiversity in Malaysia. But this one is very sectoral. When we talk about sectoral, mean that it's not really one law cannot govern everything. But when we talk about biodiversity, it's very vast. It's huge. Everything under the science is actually biodiversity. So we have plants, like I mentioned just now, we have species biodiversity, we have genetic biodiversity, and also ecosystem biodiversity. If we use one law, it's not sufficient. But in principle, biodiversity is actually under the purview of the Ministry of Natural Resources and also Sustainability. So there are several laws relevant to biodiversity, which we have National Forestry Act, which this act is to provide for the conservations and also management of forests and forestry development. And also it includes the provision, the protection of wildlife as well as biodiversity in forest reserve.
So this is National Forestry Act.
But that law is only applicable for forests.
Okay.
So it does not actually extend to other things of biodiversity.
Like wildlife.
Yeah, wildlife. Because it only protect wildlife which is in the national forest.
Okay.
But other than if the wildlife is actually outside the jurisdiction, so that one is not covered under this act. But we do have one law on wildlife. We call it as Wildlife Conservation Act 2010, and this act aims to protect wildlife species and their habitats. So it includes provision for the establishment of wildlife reserves, sanctuaries, as well as penalties of offences such as huntings, trapping, and also trading of protected species. Moving on, we also have, apart from National Forestry Act, we also have National Park Act. We have several national parks in Malaysia, right? So that one is actually, the law is actually to provide for the establishments and management of national park in Malaysia. The idea is actually to protect and conserve natural habitats and also biodiversity. So we have in Sabah and Sarawak, of course, and then we have Perak, Pahang, Terengganu on the national parks. So also that one is actually on the land biodiversity. For the marine biodiversity, of course, we do have one. It's actually on Fisheries Act. The act regulate fishing activities in Malaysian waters, and also include for the conservation and management of marine biodiversity. And this one,
does that include coral reefs as well?
Yes. So because it's also to establish the marine park and reserve.
Okay.
And of course, we do have one which is very special, and this one is actually the main legislations governing environmental protections in Malaysia. We call it as Environmental Quality Act 1974, which, if I'm not mistaken, 2 weeks ago, the amendment to this act, because it was passed back in 1974, and it has gone through many amendments, and then the latest amendment has been read in the House of in the Parliament 2 weeks ago, and it has been passed for the amendment to most of the I think 3 or 4 offences. The penalty for this offence has been increased to 10 million ringgit. Previously it was around, the highest was 500,000 ringgit, but now the penalty has been upgraded to 10 million ringgit on certain offences, for example, for schedule waste and also for inland waters. So this is a good move in the protection of environment and biodiversity in Malaysia with the amendment of this main legislation of environmental protection in Malaysia, because it actually this act aims to, at one hand, to protect, to control the pollution. Of course, we cannot stop the pollution. I always ask my student whether we can stop pollution or not. What happens if we stop pollution? If we stop pollution, that means we stop development. So it's not sustainable. So what we can do is actually to stop, to prevent and to reduce pollution. So how to do that? We need the law to guide us how much a day we can discharge the emissions to the atmosphere, for example. And also, on the other hand, this law is actually to manage natural resources, flora and fauna. So that is why we have EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment. And also the penalty for non-compliance for EIA provision under the new amendment also be increased, because there are so many projects on that require EIA report, environmental impact assessment. They submitted the report and then they have been granted with the approval, but on terms of monitoring, some of the industry, some of the developers fail to comply with the license or the approval. So that is why we also need to see whether this new law can be enforced and implemented thoroughly, so that it achieves the objective of protecting the biodiversity. Because when we look, doctor, for example, some people will ask, we have so many developments. We go back to the cause of natural biosafety loss just now. So one of it is human population and also construction of cities. So of course these two needs EIA. Of course farming also need EIA. So, and then we understand that they got the approvals and also the consents to proceed with the project. But why is this? There is monkeys and also a lot of wildlife, especially in the housing areas. Can we go back to that, and then we have a ponder, why is this happening? Is it because of their habitats? Their habitat has been destroyed, they've been replaced with this development. So should be in the report, when they submit the report, they should also consider this habitat, the ecosystem of this. That is why when we lost the biodiversity, it breaks the change of the ecosystem. They lost the habitat, the monkeys, the dogs, and also the other reptiles. And then now balik raya, some of the when some of the what they want to go back to their hometown for balik raya. I can't remember the highway, because they met with the elephants. I think it's Jimmy. So because their natural habitat has been disturbed, so that is why they come out to the road, and then because they think that is their population. So these are the things that we need to balance, and then how the law actually maintains the balancedness of this biodiversity, so that it's not break the ecosystem. Because when we break the ecosystem, see what happens? Elephants come out.
The animals are displaced.
Yeah, they're displaced, and then all these are actually they are not the disturbance. That is their place. We need to treat them equally as we treat our needs. So we need to have a sustainable. When we talk about sustainable use and also fair and equitable sharing, so these are the things that we need to include in our consideration and in our decision making when we make a decision. Because the policy is there. The policy clearly states that in equitable and fair sharing. So is it equitable and is it fair? So to all the community in the biodiversity.
Aside from the laws that you mentioned, are there any more laws that maybe have been enacted to protect our biodiversity?
Oh, okay. I forgot one other law, Biosafety Act. Okay. Yes, this is very interesting, but I think this law is not so well known in the society because in Europe and also in the developed countries, yes, because it's very useful there because it's a talk about genetically modified organisms. So we need more awareness and literacy about genetically modified organism in Malaysia because this is a product of modern biotechnology. We invent some things, and then the technology is actually rapidly developed, and we cannot catch. Sometimes the law cannot catch up with that, same as AI. So it has been, the law has been here since 2000, back in 2007. But now even the threshold for the low level presence of GMO also still, we are still developing that threshold, that policy on how much actually we can allow for to be approved for our consumption and also to be approved to come into our country. This law is very important because it actually it modifies some things. It modifies the genetic. When you modify the genetic, back to our mention just now, the genetic biodiversity will of course be altered. So when we altered some things, there is consequences to that. So the consequences, yes, this technology, modern biotechnology of genetic modifications organism is very good because of food security, because of the environment, and also for the health purposes. But of course, we also need to look into the ethics behind the technology to the environment, to the biodiversity. So that is why this law, okay, because Malaysia is actually one of the signature to Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, which governs the safety handling, transport and the use of living modified organisms. We have this law to minimize the potential risk of this technology, the product of this technology, which is genetic modified organism, to biodiversity and also human health, with the considerations of social economy. When we talk about preserving and conserving the environment, of course we need to balance that with the economy and also social. Of course we have ESG now. So this biotechnology, yes, we need this biotechnology for food safety, for health purposes, but at the same time we also need to understand how to minimize the risk. And how to minimize the risk, there are so many parties involved, so many things need to be considered, especially what is so many stakeholders involved. So this law is actually not only meant to be a cosmetic, but this law need to be enforced and implemented. And of course, to do that, there are so many procedures that we need to follow. And adding to that, Doctor, we also have, of course, we have the international law, because we have to remember, when we talk about environment, when we talk about biodiversity, it's not a domestic thing. It's not about our local law only, because biodiversity, it can go beyond our jurisdiction. For example, when we talk about marine biodiversity, it's not only in our oceans. It go everywhere. For example, the plastic thing. Okay, plastic. When we dump plastics, when you just throw plastics while we are driving, this plastic will go to perhaps to not the river, to the drainage. So from drainage they will go to the river. So from river they will go to the oceans. And these oceans we cannot contain the oceans. Then we go to, perhaps they will go to Bali Island. So this is not only a Malaysian law, it's actually international law that need to govern these biodiversity matters. So that is why we have the Convention on Biodiversity, Convention on Biological Diversity, and to actually for the countries who signs the convention, this international law, for all these countries to come up with the mechanisms and also the law on how they want to commit their obligations under that international law. And also one of the commitments is actually by having our national law, so that we have a same standard as other countries in the world who signed the treaties. Apart from that, of course, we have just now we mentioned about Cartagena Protocol on Biodiversity, and also we have the Ramsar Convention on wetlands. On top of that, on top of the international law, we also have our national policies. Our national policies on biological diversity. This one is actually to guide the biosafety, conservation and sustainable use of the product of biodiversity.
Thank you, Dr. Siti Hafsyah, for I would say a very comprehensive overview of the laws that we have and also the laws that we have ratified internationally. Some people may be quite skeptical when it comes to laws. They say you can have such beautiful laws, you can have such perfect policies, but when it comes to implementation, there seems to be a lot of problems in terms of implementing them. So how, in your view, how can we make laws effective in protecting biodiversity?
So the first of all, when I involved with the developing of law now, it's very interesting that when we want to develop the law, and then there's a requirement now, when you develop the law, you need to actually get all the stakeholders to involve. So we need to have a public consultation and then public engagement, because with these public engagements, public will understand actually what the governments are doing, and then what is actually will be regulated under the law. So that one is very important. We need to engage the public and also all the stakeholders, industry, researchers, scientists who are involved in that matter. For example, when we want to amend the Environmental Quality Act, so that one, many parties, stakeholders are involved. So when everyone is actually in the know about the process, about the law, all this input will be considered and then will be proposed as what is the ideal law. So they know from the beginning, oh, we want to do this. For example, now we are negotiating on the international law of the plastic. So everyone can participate on giving them the idea. Of course, there's a conflict, so many conflicts, because one party need the law, one party doesn't need the law. So how to harmonize these views? So to harmonize this view and also what is actually needed for the country. So that is very important. And we also need to harmonize the policy, because we go back to difference. Just now I mentioned about we cannot work in silo. So we know that biotechnology is needed for the development of the country, economy of the country, but at the same time we need to protect. So how to actually to harmonize, to work hands in hands between the biotechnology policy and also the biodiversity policy. So to get that point, to connect the dot is very important on part of the, of course, ministry level. And when now we are talking about how law can be more adaptive and also flexible enough to respond to the changing circumstances. For example, just now the modern technology, AI thing. So this one, how law can catch up very fast to this, and also I think it's also human factors, because when we talk about law, there are so many, especially environmental law. It can be very challenges, because we have not only the policy issues, how to harmonize, we have also the regional issues, federal and also state level. But the most important thing is actually the human factors, because I see sometimes the enforcement officer, when we don't have many enforcement officers, this is also lack of enforcement, because this thing we need to, I know there's so many things involved, especially fundings and also human capital, but we need to, when we want to have that law, it must be supported with the financial mechanism. We must support it with capacity building. So, and they need to understand, like Dr. mentioned just now, if only one party to do that and the other party doesn't want to cooperate, it's also a waste of energy and also a waste of idea. So we don't want a wastage of idea and also the effort. What we need to do is actually we need to know why. So especially if we don't have enough manpower, so we need to cooperate. We need to find out what are the ways to understand this, and then also the determination on the why we need to preserve and also to protect the environment. That is very important.
I think you have actually highlighted the challenges and difficulties in coming up with a law that can satisfy every stakeholder.
Yes.
I think the important thing is to find the meeting point between all stakeholders, and this is something that I think is a big task being carried out by our ministries and also those involved in the process. Perhaps we're coming to the end of our program. Perhaps maybe we can give some conclusion to our discussion on the importance of law with regards to biodiversity.
Okay, thank you, Doctor, for that. The importance of law. Why? Because we need to preserve the biodiversity. Just now, when we talk about biodiversity, it's actually the interaction of community inside the ecosystem itself. Like I remember there's a hadith, if I'm not mistaken, that even the rock, even the tree, they are actually salawat to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They are actually zikr every day. So they are living things. So they are very important in the ecosystem. But we need the law on how to protect them, because without the law, like I mentioned just now, we do our own way, and then there is no guided principle and guided way to do that. So it won't be a consensus on how to preserve and conserve this biodiversity. So the law is that not to restrict, not to limit, but it's actually to control how to use that biodiversity in a sustainable manner and equitable and fair sharing. And also the law is actually to be there to be enforced and implemented by those who actually use of that things. So we have work hand in hand. Not only we blame it to the enforcement officer. So we need to play a role as a public, how to help them for them to enforce the law. So we need to report, for example, we need to lodge a report to the relevant authorities, and then we need to give the feedback to the relevant authorities for the law to be comprehensively and holistically enforced and implemented. And the objective is actually, it's only one objective, to conserve and to protect the biodiversity for the sake of present and also future generations. So this is very important, because we are the Khalifah of Allah, and then we have the responsibility not only to the law but also to our nature, and also for our responsibility and amanah for the future, so that they also can have the opportunity to experience whatever we have now in their era.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Siti Hafsyah. I believe that nicely sums up our discussion in today's episode of Men and Nature. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Siti Hafsyah has highlighted why laws are important in ensuring that biodiversity is protected and preserved. And as she shared with us, in Malaysia we have many laws that are in place towards ensuring that our biodiversity is protected. But of course, there are challenges that need to be addressed, and I believe that as part of our responsibility as Khalifah on this planet, Dr. Siti Hafsyah has mentioned this, we will continuously work towards ensuring that these challenges are addressed. And this task as Khalifah is in line with a famous hadith narrated by Abdullah ibn Umar, فَكُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ, which means every one of you is a shepherd and is responsible for the flock. And looking after the biodiversity is indeed our responsibility. The laws that have been enacted help towards ensuring that our task in doing so can be effective towards realizing this very huge responsibility. Thank you again, Dr. Siti Hafsyah, for joining me in today's Man and Nature. Inshallah, our discussion has been informative and beneficial to all who are listening. Tune in again next week at the same time for another discussion from another perspective on biodiversity. For the last 30 minutes, you have been listening to Man and Nature. I'm Shaikh Muhammad Saifuddeen bin Shaikh Muhammad Salleh, signing off until next week. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum